would have been. In the coming weeks, we're going to plan for a transition. We'll update the job description and gather a hiring team and do a national search for a full-time director of family ministry, hopefully to begin later this fall. In the meantime, I hope you'll join me in a whole lot of congratulations, tempered with sadness too, for Reverend Dana's departure. I'm so happy for you to move into a ministry that matches the full breadth of the gifts that you bring. It's a whole lot of change for us too, and we'll have a lot of chances to wish her well between now and October 16th, that last Sunday, where Reverend Dana will preach and look back at the long winding road of her time here, and we'll celebrate. I hope today you'll stay to talk with her after the service or join the board's listening session in the Emerson room. It's the monthly board listening session. I'll be there as part of that too. And for now, Reverend Dana, thank you. We open with these words for a call to worship. Come in. Come into this space which we make holy by our presence. Come in with all your vulnerabilities and your strengths. Come in with your fears and anxieties and loves and hopes, because here you need not hide, nor pretend, nor be anything other than who you are and who you're called to be. Come into this space, and we can heal and be healed. We can forgive and be forgiven. Come into this space where the ordinary is sanctified, and the human is celebrated, and the compassionate is expected. Together, we make it a holy space. We rise in body or spirit. Let's join in singing as our kids and youth join Reverend Dana in heading to class.
One, two, three, 1, 2, 3.
Be seated. It's awfully good to be back with you again. This summer I had the gift of getting to go back to Boston to see family and friends I hadn't seen since before pandemic, 3 years and more. It was good to be there, but it is awfully good to be back here with you all again and without humidity. I'll tell you a story of another vacation. Years and years ago, I was traveling through mountains, and I stepped out of this little tour bus we were all on to see a river, a torrent, just white water rushing over rocks, coming out of the side of a hill, and coming full born, full alive, full force, right just from the wall where there was no river. It was underground, and that was the very point where this underground river, yards from where I was standing, burst out. And since that moment, I've thought and returned again and again to underground rivers, those mighty forces, the things moving unseen under our feet. Those rivers begin with just drops, raindrops, work their way through earth and stone. A slight crack, a small opening, that's all that was needed. And over time and space and in combination, they create that river. They create something that carves the rock, that changes the face of the land. We arrive today in this house, all of us, little droplets combining. We arrive as a people with joy for a new year, weary with sorrow for the world. And sometimes life weighs down like rock, presses our spirits. But friends, all it takes is a small opening, a tiny crack in that rock. And community, when we join together, all our little drops, we can form streams that open narrow passages, that join together, that make rivers underground and burst forth, shaping the face of the land. Amen.
The chalice is a symbol of our Unitarian Universalist tradition. It is a cup of life, sustenance to quench our spirit's thirst, a cup of celebration and resolve, a flame of hope, a light to warm our souls and guide us home. I'd like to invite Janelle Freeston to light this morning's chalice.
Good morning. When I was asked to do the chalice lighting for today, which falls on a water ceremony day, tears of joy filled my eyes because water has been a really important meandering theme in my life and one of the reasons that brought me to UUCB. So I'm going to take a few minutes now to share 3 ways of how UUCB quenched my spiritual thirst for meaning. So the first way is that UUCB really quenched my spiritual thirst is through wisdom and stories. And that's that collective wisdom and story that we all bring together to share with each other. I was introduced to UUCB back in 2018. I was experiencing a spiritual drought at the time. I was working full-time and a mom of 2 very lively boys. You probably saw them over here. River is my 10-year-old, and Talon is my 7-year-old. So you can see how water's been a theme, right? And I was grateful, actually, to be able to listen to to worship services from the comfort of my own home. I'd have on my iPod, I'd be running around chasing my boys. I felt like they just were not ready to be in the congregation yet. So for about a full year, I listened online, and again, that's really before podcasts were a thing. So thank you for being innovative and ahead of the curve. I really appreciate that. So then finally, I was able to start to come, and I started to join family ministry when I knew that my boys would be able to be served here and welcomed with open arms. And really, this was in contrast to my Catholic upbringing, where wisdom was not really embodied by all of us and shared by all of us. It was, a priest up at the front and sharing that wisdom that we all had to take in. So I really, over the last couple of years, have enjoyed the chalice readings like this one today, the readings that bring in more than just Gospels, and also the family ministry offerings. I was submerged with inspiration. So the second aspect of how my thirst for meaning was quenched was right over there, that 7th principle, that interconnectedness of all beings. And growing up on Lake Erie in Pennsylvania, I grew up watching the sunsets, rowing, and just taking in and understanding the importance of water on earth. And again, I would sit in those pews growing up as a Catholic, and my brain would just, why are they talking about other things besides humans, right? Darn it. So I was so happy again that, wow, I was bursting with joy. Here's a religion that honors and respects other beings besides human and brings in the elements of water, fire, earth, air, right? And actually, everyone take a minute and look at your hands, right? Even just the connectedness that we have with water. Don't our veins look like tributaries, right? All flowing to common. Like, it's like no-brainer, but we just don't even talk about it. So that was the second thing that brought me to UUCB, was that seventh principle. And finally, the last one was the tradition we actually celebrate today, the water communion. Again, as a Catholic, both water and communion had very different contexts. Communion, it was like if you hadn't gone to confession in a while, you weren't worthy enough to be able to take communion. And with water, baptisms, it is a celebration, but it's a celebration that if you don't get baptized, you might not go to heaven. All these these connotations of not being worthy enough. And again, that contrasts so much with what Unitarian Universalism is all about. Today, we'll all be bringing water from different parts of our being, right? It could be the tap water. It could be metaphorical water we're bringing today. It could be from our favorite creek, Boulder Creek, for example. And we're bringing it all together. We know it's not pure. We're bringing it together. We can share that together, and it becomes that bigger piece than us as a single entity. I love that. I love that about Unitarian Universalism. So in closing, because truly, I'm not making this up, I was a water educator for 7 years. I love water. I love water. One of my favorite activities, we're going to take our individual selves, our droplets, we're going to use our hands, and we're going to create a rainstorm, right? We're going to create a rainstorm that turns into a river. So let's all do this together. I'll help you. So you want your hands ready, okay? First, the wind's going to start to blow. And then very slowly, I'll start from this side of the room first. We're going to have a couple, everyone else keep rubbing your hands. We're going to have a couple drops starting over on this side of the room. Then the drops start to flow over to here. Now over to here. Over here. Now same thing, keep snapping until let me come up, okay, now you can't hear me then. Okay, then over here, we're going to start to clap. Everyone else keep snapping. Clap. Clap. Now, go ahead and on your knees or over here, over here, over here. Maybe a little thunder. And then we're going to do the opposite. Keep the patting. Then we're going to start to clap from over here. Start to clap. Okay, keep clapping, but then we're going to start to snap. Start to snap. Start to snap. And then the wind. Thank you, UUCB. My heart is overflowing. I light the chalice this morning in gratitude for stories, interconnectedness, and water communion and ceremony.
Thank you. We are a promise-making, promise-breaking, and a promise-remaking people. We are called not to be perfect, but to be faithful. In that spirit, each week we speak our covenant aloud, all together. It is a reminder of the promises we make in this gathered community. In person and online, will you join as one and say our covenant? We gather in fellowship to speak truth to each other, to reach out and touch one another, to care with each other, and to seek the truth divine. So be it.
Will you join me in a spirit of prayer and meditation, a spirit of stillness, of centering, of moving inwards and listening out? Spirit of life and love, called by many names and understood in different ways. We arrive at this moment, each of us carrying with us our full and complicated lives, each of us grief and joy woven together. And in this house, we celebrate and we honor the holiness of that human living. We lift up and care for the community and each other. We grieve with those who are sad and rejoice with those who are glad. Particularly this week, we lift up Barb Richards and Fred Cole. Their daughter Kendall's memorial was yesterday, and Fred says, the two of us are incredibly blessed by this community. There's been an outpouring of love and caring. And we lift up in joy Babs and Gary Hurley, who had a visit from their son Graham, and his wife Ricky, and new two grandchildren, Kestrel and Sylvan. And that's the fullness of all of our lives. Each of us has cause to grieve, and each of us cause to celebrate. And in this moment of pause and of stillness, we don't weigh those things against each other as if they should balance, but instead hold the fullness of both. Our words for meditation are by the poet Faith Sheeran, this called Places I've Heard the Ocean. Places I've heard the ocean. In a cat's throat. In a shell I hold to my ear, though I'm told this is the sound of my own blood. I've heard the ocean in the city, cars against the beach of our street, or in the subway waiting for a train that carries me like a curtain. In my bed, places of high and low tide, or in my daughter's skates rolling over the sidewalk. Ocean in the trees when they fill their heads with wind. Ocean in the rise and fall lungs of everyone I love. In the spirit of that interconnection, we'll be together in silence for 7 breaths. Amen. The first water communion ritual was created by the leaders of the Unitarian Universalist Association's Women and Religion Committee for the opening and closing worship of their first major gathering, November 1980. Was anyone there then? I'm curious. Yeah. All right. So Diane's been with this from the very beginning. That first water communion was celebrated with a powerful sense of calling and of mission. They wanted, at that gathering, to begin, to mark a milestone in a long-term effort of consciousness raising, of commitment among us to make sure that women's voices were heard, that women's experiences were reflected in our congregational life and worship. And those who gathered from around the United States and Canada to talk about the meaning and the implications of feminist theology for our faith, they felt they knew the work they had taken up could change our faith and the world, and 42 years later, it emphatically has. They came together in small groups all around the continent, more than 300, and shared ideas and drew strength from each other, and then returned home to those groups again. And the water communion was meant to represent in ritual action that sharing, that mutual strengthening, the way that each droplet together combined creates a torrent, reshapes landscapes. And they knew that when you believe a thing in your head, that's good, but what does it mean then to live it out in your actions and embody it in ritual? And in our congregations, this ritual has been widely adopted. After the flaming chalice, this is maybe the most widely celebrated thing Unitarian Universalists do, usually right about this time of year, ingathering at the end of summer. One of the meanings for the word communion is gathered in unity, in common fellowship. And a droplet of water alone has no color. It's clear, maybe invisible almost, but in combination, those drops together make rainbows. They make unseen realities present for everyone to witness. In this annual water communion, we remember who we are and what we're about. Just as water exists individually, molecules and droplets, and collectively, lakes and oceans and streams, we are united as individuals in a living tradition that flows through this house, that flows through time. In just a moment, each of us will come forward and pour out a small bit of water, maybe brought with you from summer travels or wild source or kitchen faucet or one of the crafts here in front. Bringing this water, merging it together, symbolizes our fellowship. We come from many sources. We're young and old, new and old-timers. And this mingled water is made sacred by the many hands that pour it with intention and love, the stories each drop contains, and the lives surrounding it in this moment connected by commitment and faith. And while we don't all gather together physically, it is a joyful thing to be transformed into a congregation both in person and online. Nonetheless, we are one. I invite you as the music begins to come forward for this water communion. This water will be added to the water we've gathered and saved for 40 years and more now, filtered and cleaned and boiled, and then used in our child dedications, welcoming new life into the community. Immediately following the service, we're going to pour some of this water out to nourish the meditation garden just around the corner, and Fred Cole's going to lead a blessing in 4 directions, spilling the water as a symbol of our commitment to respecting the earth and creating peace. Anyone who wants to join him, they'll be at the back door right there after the closing at the end of the service. We opened this morning declaring that the space is made holy by your presence, made holy by your intention, giving meaning, given a weight that can't be measured. That's a blessing. And so together we'll bless the waters. I'll begin. If you'll respond, this water is sacred. This water is made sacred by the many hands that have poured it with intention and love, the many stories that each drop contains, the lives surrounding it, connected by commitment and faith. This water is sacred. May it continue to flow through this community, shining with the reflections of the unique gifts that flow through each of us. May it continue to nurture this community with sustaining hope that we journey together through ripples of growth and change. May it continue to bless us with loving reminders of our collective responsibility to one another and to the world. May its ripples be a reminder that the changes and growth within this community bring movement and transformation inside each of us and in the world beyond our doors. May its purity offer grace to our community, the willingness to forgive ourselves and one another when we make mistakes. And in moments when the reservoirs of heart and spirit are drained by sorrow or pain, may it nourish them, may it nourish us with the knowledge that we are surrounded by a deep and abundant love. Amen. When I was in kindergarten, more or less, my sister must have been in 2nd or 3rd grade, something like that, my parents went church shopping. Both of them, like some of you, maybe like many of you, had left the conservative traditions of their childhood, not wanting to be told that they had to believe things that clearly seemed untrue. But by the time my sister and I were young, they wanted us something, and the story goes, my mom tells me, she may be watching online right now. I hope I get this right, Mom. The story goes that her dear friend Sally Patrick, who had been in playgroup together with all the little ones, was teaching religious education at the Unitarian church in town. One of two, actually, because we grew up out in New England where Unitarians are thick on the ground. Sally was teaching Sunday school, and my mom said, well, if Sally's teaching, it can't be that bad. And it wasn't, and clearly it stuck. Church shopping is maybe not the best word to use. You know, you're not going church to church looking for the best value for your money. There's not a UU Church of Boulder discount card yet. But shopping is not quite the right word, because being part of a church community, it's not a transaction. It's a relationship. It's a whole lot of relationships. But then again, as much as I don't like the consumerist, selfish, self-serving implications of shopping, it seems weird to say like church dating. How to shop for a church makes more sense than how to date churches. But shopping for church, I mean, it is about being in a relationship. And maybe the questions you might ask yourself early in a dating relationship are the same sort of questions to bring to a church community when you're trying it on for size. You ask things like, is the person you see on your first date, your first time, is that really who they are? Or have they just put on a face to behave in a certain way in that moment? You say, is this person I'm with, is this church I'm with, do they build me up or do they cut me down? Are they curious about me, or am I just a foil for a monologue? And you ask yourself over and over, whether it's with people that you're exploring relationship with, or whether it's with church you're exploring relationship, you say, do I get to bring all of myself to this relationship? Or do they want me to leave some part of myself behind in order to conform? I asked a group of Unitarian ministers for suggestions and advice and red flags that you might give to a person looking for a new church home. And one colleague said, for me, the metric is always, does it seem like people in general feel empowered to show up as their full selves, as their messy, imperfect, marginalized selves, and receive care and support? And she said then that question's followed real quick with, do I feel empowered to show up here as my full, messy, marginalized, imperfect self? She says, is a culture of welcome made explicit through words and actions, or does welcome rely entirely on subtext, on sort of wasp-flavored politeness and unspoken communication norms, which if broken or transgressed, put someone on the outside, which is a little bit of a spicy take, but is not wrong. When we talk about a culture of welcome, all of that is what we're talking about. Do I get to be me on Sunday morning? And do I make space for everyone else? So there's my first shopping tip for you all. Look for a community where you get to bring all of yourself just as you are. A community where hiding is not the price of admission. A minister friend told me the story of when his father visited the church that he was serving. This was my friend's dad, first time ever seeing him preach. He tells this story. He says, my dad came wearing his cowboy hat and his big belt buckle, not just his large belt buckle or you know what I mean, a buckle. And not one person talked to him during the service or at coffee hour. He said it was the least welcoming group of people he'd ever been with. I told the church about it the next time I was in the pulpit. And they asked me, why didn't you tell us who he was? And I asked them, why would that have mattered? When you're looking for a community to be part of, when you're looking for a community to create, where can you bring all yourself just as you are, messy and imperfect, short and regardless of belt buckle size? And you can clean up nice. I'm not saying don't go get a haircut and put on a suit and come to church. I'm just saying, does the community welcome and embrace you when you don't? Do people think how you look is who you are? Yesterday afternoon, we gathered for the memorial service for Kendall Richards. It would have been her 55th birthday. And among the many, many stories shared, one friend and coworker said that Kendall took on a mom role for so many of us who felt sad and unloved. And she was always there to tell us she loved us, and if others didn't, that was on them, not us. She told us we were worthy and lovable. That's the spirit to look for. When you shop for a church, you ask, do they build me up or do they cut me down? Do they tell you there are good people and bad people and that you're bad until you get what they've got? Do they tell you some people are going to be tortured for eternity unless they follow that community's version of the rules? Is shame the way they motivate? Because all of that, friends, and we don't say this too often, but all of that stuff is junk theology. Run away from that. That kind of community takes our natural desire to want to do the right thing, and it hijacks hope and turns it into fear, and it terrorizes your compassion and turns it into a threat against everyone who you love. Or maybe more subtly, the way to say it is, when you shop for a church, ask in that community, do some people count more than other people? Look for a community where the highest rank you can attain is regular human being, and everyone has already attained it. Do men count for more than women? Do some people get to choose what's right for them, and other people need their bodies and lives controlled? One old minister a century ago said, the purpose of church, the purpose of going is to become a person among persons. That is, to be a human being in a community which sees you and everyone there as human beings, messy, imperfect. Yes, of course, we are promise-making and promise-breaking and promise-remaking creatures. To be a person among persons. You've had, probably at some point, I've done this sometimes, a conversation where the other person did not need to be there. You know, like if you were replaced by a cardboard cutout and sort of slowly backed away, the transcript would not reflect any difference. That's not a virtue. That doesn't make for healthy relationships over time. So the question there is there mutuality in the people that I meet? Are they curious about me? Am I curious about them? That's what it is to be a person among persons. My experiences don't count more for yours. They certainly don't. Not just come up here in a robe and a microphone. All of us count. And I'm no higher rank than regular human being either. A curious community like that is also a changing community. So friends, look for a church where you don't have to be the same forever. And neither does anyone else. A church where every person is on a path of change, big, small, quick, slow. Are you living in a community or a museum? A friend said, here's a red flag. If you try to get involved with something, committee work, do people receive that with enthusiasm and invitation, or do they close ranks? If I mess up, do people talk about it directly with me with kindness or compassion? Or it's a you should have known better, passive-aggressive sort of thing? I'm so struck. I was thinking about this today. Last spring, at one of our 9 a.m. services, we have them in the Sky Room. It's a little bit more informal, more singing. Just check it out sometime. I don't mean to put in an advertisement for the 9 a.m. service, but there it is. At one of those 9 a.m. services, with someone who is a relative newcomer to the community, come over to the welcome table and station himself there. And not one person, as far as I know, came up and patted him on the shoulder and said, well, you know, Barb and Fred sit at the welcome table. You'll need to find somewhere else to go. Right? And they do, and it's beautiful, and I love it, and people didn't close ranks. They received it with enthusiasm and energy. And one delighted hug and handshake after another. It's beautiful. Like the trees out there, a living community is rooted in the past and growing towards the future. If you were to go to another church, you might get a very different set of recommendations on how to do church shopping. The questions I'm encouraging you to ask, these come from the values that we hold dear. These come from the values on the wall behind me here, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and the interconnectedness of all life, justice and equity and compassion in how we relate, acceptance and encouragement to spiritual growth. These are our values expressed in our 7 principles. So, of course, I'm going to suggest church shopping questions that get at these. But those are the heart of it. Can you be who you are? Does your experience count? Do you need to leave some part of yourself behind? Do they cut me down or build me up? Do I feel better leaving than I did coming in, even if I don't always like it? Are they curious about me? And do I get to bring all of myself into this relationship? These questions, friends, are not just about how to look for a church, but how to create the church that people are looking for. And I am so honored and delighted to be beginning this adventure of my 2nd year together with you, creating this community together. Amen.
Please rise and body your spirit and join us in singing hymn 1064, Blue Boat Home.
Mountains and plains, far away from the road.
During August, our Share a Plate offering will be used directly to support the work of this congregation, our programs, and our ministries. I invite you to give as generously as you are able. For those online, you can use the QR code or find a link in the video description. For those gathered in person, you can scan the QR code or make a donation as the ushers now pass the baskets. May our gifts be used to enact justice, bring peace, and love to the Boulder community.
Blessings of generosity rest on us, and may its presence abide within us, and our hearts rise in gladness and gratitude for all the gifts we receive. Friends, we end our time together as makers of community, as weavers of a fabric of interconnection. And in that spirit, I invite you onwards to coffee and conversation and fellowship, or outwards to pour our water into the garden and bless the four direction, or inwards in the Emerson room to talk with the board about what's next for the life of this congregation. Our worship ends and our service begins again. Go in peace. And amen. Will you rise and body your spirit? We'll close in song.